Good afternoon, everyone. Country Flyboy here, and today we're going to demonstrate seaplane operations. So the past 4 or 5 videos has been all discussion. This is actually demonstrating them. So particularly we're going to be demonstrating the discussion of the last video, which is seaplane undocking, taxi, takeoff, landing, taxi, and redock. Now, in the last video, I may have said something along the lines that there is no current or no wind to worry about. Well, during the setup process for recording this, I seem to have been proven wrong. There is still some wind to worry about because the wind is blowing right now. It is about 4 knots, and my plane is actually moving. I know this because if you look closely at this dock, you will notice that this point is over more and is slowly moving across the screen, very slowly. And I realized this because when I first spawned the plane and started the sim up, I was actually pointing that way. So there is indeed some worry of wind. It doesn't look like the seaplane has really moved its position so much as the wind has sort of blown the seaplane around. It looks like it's wanting to weather vane into the wind. So do keep that in mind. It seems that that is a thing. Alrighty then. So we talked about undocking last time. I'm not gonna talk about the pre-flight in this video because it's all done beforehand. So we're just going to start right off from the docking. So with docking, we want to complete as much of the pre-start checklist and startup check as we can before pushing off from the dock. So I'm going to bring up the checklist real quick, and I'm using the knee board, which is not showing up in the recording, sadly, but that's fine. I'll just verbally go through the checklist. So before engine start, magnetos, that's up here. We're using the A2A Piper Cub today because it's the best representation of a seaplane you can find, and the Cub's weaker engine means we have to properly execute seaplane procedures. We can't just rely on engine power alone to get us airborne because it won't in this aircraft. Now, if you want an add-on recommendation, I'm actually going to recommend A2A's Accufeel Air, Land, and Sea add-on, not an individual plane. But we'll talk about that more at another time. So, magnetos are set to off, or both. I'm going to leave them in both. Fuel is on. Right there, fuel is on. Carb heat is off. Propeller area, not clear yet. Dock, push off. Alright. I'm actually going to move them to both, or off. Now we're going to get in the paddle. Now one thing I like about the A2A Cub is when you get into the paddle position, you can click that paddle and you can actually move the plane around in the water with the paddle. Whereas with basically every other seaplane, you have to use slew mode. That's the only way to move the plane around in the water without using the engine. So I'm going to paddle the seaplane out away from the dock now. We want to paddle away from the dock several feet and then turn the airplane perpendicular to the dock in the direction that we want to taxi out. Now, I have not changed my settings for this recording. We are in the Orlando area, and when we're looking off in this direction, that's where Orlando International is, so we might get a bit of a frame rate impact. Alrighty. I don't like the way our tail is still pointing towards the dock, so we'll turn a little bit this way. We actually want to taxi out that direction, but this will work fine right here. And we're just going to put the paddle back in place and climb back in the virtual cockpit. Bring the checklist back up. Alrighty. Engine start. Magnetos to both. throttle is cracked. We'll crack the throttle open a bit. And we're going to prime 2 pumps of the primer. 1. 2. Carb heat off. And then we have to get back out onto the float and hand prop this airplane. We'll grab a hold of the prop, give it a turn. Come on, baby, start up. There we go. It took a little while. Back in the cockpit and bring the throttle back so the plane doesn't start moving. I think it did move a little bit. Alright, throttle for just under 1,000 RPM. Allow the engine to warm up until the oil temp is in the green arc. There is no oil temp gauge on this airplane. Or at least it doesn't have a green arc. Well, we'll just let it warm up. So, with engine start done, we'll go ahead and close the door. We are now ready to taxi out, and we're just going to go ahead and lower the water rudder. Remember, the water rudder gives us more maneuverability when we're in the water. But we need to avoid making sharp turns with it, as the Flight Sim X, is a bit rough when it comes to things on the water. Alright, so we're here at Orlando Seaplane Base in Orlando, Florida, and you can see the buoys out there. So that's a keep left buoy, red, and that's a keep right buoy, green. But remember, the keep left, keep right only applies when you're coming inland from the water, when you're coming inland, ocean to the back. So we're going to be moving out, so we want to stay left of the green buoys, right of the red buoys, and we'll keep along the right side of the channel. The buoys actually do extend pretty good ways out, all the way to the water runway, which is a good distance out, but we're not going to go all the way out there, or at least I don't think we will. So recall from the discussion that there are 3 ways of taxiing the seaplane: the idle, the plowing, and the on-step way. So when we're in close proximity to the dock like this, and pretty much whenever we're within the marina area of this base, we want to use the idle position. So we're only going to give the plane a little bit of throttle, no back pressure on the yoke or stick, and we're just going to slowly pull away from the dock. Another Piper Cub, and another one beached over there. With the water rudder down, make a slow movement of the rudder. Don't be too aggressive with it. And we'll move to point the seaplane in the direction we want to go. Now, current is not something we have to worry about, but apparently wind is. So in real life, you need to be careful, because the seaplane is essentially always in motion. It's not really going to be always in motion in Flight Sim, so it's not too much to worry about. But all the same, keep mindful of obstacles, especially if you're using add-on scenery. As you can see, we do have some obstacles around this seaplane base. We have the Yetis over here on both sides of the inlet. We have a rock over there, which is marked by a lit day beacon. No sign on the day beacon, just a pole with a flashing light to let us know that there is a hazard there. And we also have the seawall along the backside of the marina. Alright, we're starting to pull into the channel now, so I'm going to increase power just a little bit, not a lot, probably about 1600, and I'm going to give it some back pressure and put us into a plowing position. And I'm going to keep, and this should start to speed the seaplane up. I'll try to avoid looking over there since the frame rate drops due to Orlando International. And once we get away from the Yetis and out into the channel itself, we can actually get to an on-step taxi. Now this is where P3D users are really going to enjoy things because they have the full 3D waves, whereas the rest of us don't. I briefly mentioned the random boats in the last video. Keep mindful of them. They are random for a reason. I don't see any in front of us now. There's a few sailboats out there, but when I made this scenery, they're static sailboats just to liven up the lake a bit. There should also be a... yeah, I can see it over there. There's a boat launch over there. Alright, we're now into the channel. So, to do the on-step taxi, we basically need to pick up speed to get the seaplane onto the step, and then pull the power back to stay onto the step without speeding up. Now, we're actually starting to get onto the step now. So let me bring the seaplane to a stop so I can show you exactly how to do this. Alright, so to do an on-the-step water taxi, we first start in the idle position. And just let the plane start coming up to speed without touching the stick. Now, as the seaplane really starts to move, and it can be a bit difficult to tell at first, especially in FSX with the flat water like this, so look for objects in the distance. You can see trees over there. I think I see some radio towers way out there. We got the buoys right here. So we could easily tell that the seaplane is starting to get going now. I'm going to give it a little bit of back pressure. Now remember, the air that comes off the prop improves the effectiveness of the rudder and the vertical or the horizontal stabilizer. Now, once we have the back pressure on, I'm going to increase throttle, not quite to takeoff power. And as you can see, the plane really gets going now. Now, that right there, did you see that little jump it did? And the sound changed? We're on the step now. So if I slowly lower the back pressure back down to neutral, I'm going to raise the water rudder using the key command. You don't want to taxi with that thing down at a high speed. I'm now going to back the power off. Around about 40 knots is where you want to keep it. 40 knots around indicated if you can manage it. You don't want to go so fast that you start to take off, but you don't want to go so slow either. Remember, when you're on the step, you can speed up very quickly. The seaplane does not speed up quickly until it gets on the step, but once it gets on the step, it will really speed up. Now remember, water rudder up during a high-speed taxi. So all of our control is with the air rudder. All the same, you still make very slow, small movements. You don't want to flip the seaplane. Now see, when I pulled the power back, we're maintaining about 40 knots indicated airspeed. And we're moving out through the channel to the water runway. Now there is no GPS on this airplane, so I can't actually look at the water runway itself. It doesn't show up on the chart. But I do know about where it is. I'm not going to go all the way out to the water runway, however. It is a good ways out. So I think right here will be a good place for it. I'm going to turn to the left a little bit. And when we get on the other side of that red buoy there, we'll bring the plane and get ready for takeoff. So we want to take off into the wind when we can. This lake, Lake Apopka, is a pretty big lake. We have lots of room available to us, so we could take off into the wind, which is coming out of about 040 right now, which is to our right. So all I gotta do is turn the plane a little bit to the right, probably around over there, and we'll be good to go. I'll try to do that during the takeoff run itself. So real quick, let me run through the before takeoff checks. Flight controls, free and correct. Pitch trim, set neutral. Altimeter, set. I'm gonna skip engine run up. I know the airplane's running well. Seatbelts secure. Takeoff area is checked. So takeoff area. I went on and on about making sure the takeoff area is clear of not just boats, but also obstacles. And that is very important, especially in real life. But in the Sims, we don't really have to worry too much about underwater obstacles. Any obstacles that are going to be in our way are probably going to be pretty visible. All the same, if you want to replicate real life procedures, go ahead. Remember, one of the good ways to do it is to actually take the seaplane during water taxi up and down the desired takeoff area. That way you can check for obstacles. One thing we absolutely do need to do is look out for boats. I haven't seen any, but that doesn't mean they're not around. I do have my water traffic settings, and you can see there are boats around. Mostly over here, you can see their wakes. They seem to be avoiding the seaplane area for the most part. Although I do see a couple who have dropped anchor. Looks like there's one moving over there. So I think I'll actually just take off in the direction I'm pointing. I don't want to turn and go into the wind, because it looks like there's boats over that direction, but they're on the other side of the lake, so it really doesn't matter. I could turn into the wind if I wanted to. Okay, water rudder is up and the area is clear of obstacles and boats. Alright, so I'm going to put the window up so we don't get wet. Water rudder is up and we are ready for takeoff. So, takeoff in the seaplane is just like getting it going on taxi. Now, you do have one choice. You could choose to go straight to full throttle, or you could choose to not go to full throttle until you are up on the step. Either way works. Really, I've done on both ways. It doesn't really increase the takeoff distance too much, since you're not going to accelerate very quickly until you get up on the step anyway. So I'm actually going to demonstrate that. I do recommend doing that if you're new to seaplanes. But once you get good at it, you can go straight to full throttle. Alright, so we're going to give it a little bit of power. And I'll try to talk through this as best I can as I do it. But the whole reason I did the discussion videos is so you can watch as I demo this without having to worry about me trying to explain it. So once we have gotten going, back pressure, and I'm going to increase the throttle to not quite take off, but fast enough. Plane is plowing right now, waiting for the little jump that it does. Right there. We are up onto the step, so I'm going to ease off the back pressure now. And the plane's roughly level. Now I increase the full throttle takeoff power. Now, just like in a land plane, the controls will slowly become effective. The weight transfers from the floats. More and more part of the weight is being held by the wings. And eventually, the plane lifts up off the water. I think we're still on it right. Yeah, we're still on it right now. I'll give it a little bit of back pressure to help it out. Not too much. I don't want to lower the rear of the floats back into the water. And as you can see, we're up off the water. Now, if you want to pick up speed, you can remain in ground effect. Just make sure you don't hit the water again. That would be bad. Or you can go right into the climb attitude. Now, as you can see, if you've ever tried to take the Piper Cub off on a land-based airport, you may have noticed that the takeoff run took longer and had significantly more distance covered. Completely normal. That is one thing you should keep in mind, especially with float planes. They take more room to take off than their land plane counterpart, and they really take more room to take off than they do landing. So big emphasis is you don't ever want to get stuck by landing somewhere where you're not able to take off again. Alrighty, we're now heading opposite direction of takeoff, pretty much on a downwind leg right there. The seaplane base is right about here. There's a small boat launch. Took off right about over there somewhere. So now we're going to land the seaplane, and as we discussed in the last video, checking the area prior to landing is very important. You don't really have to worry so much about wind and waves in FSX. You do with P3D. As you know, P3D has the 3D waves based on wind, but from what I can tell, X-Plane, FSX, and Flight Sim World all use the flat 2D water texture. You still have to worry somewhat about winds in Flight Sim World with the Accufeel thing, but you don't have to worry about too much in FSX or X-Plane. Now, we do have to worry about the boats, because the boats are somewhat random. They're random for a reason. They are very unpredictable. So we do want to check the area for boats prior to landing. Try to land where there are not too many boats. One good way, easy way of doing it is to go in the top down, zoom out a bit, and you can actually see their wakes pretty well in top down view. So there's one boat over there and there, so we're lucky there's not too many around here. There's one more there. There are static boats in this lake. Let me see if I can't find one. Right there is one, and you can actually see the wake of another boat. At least that looks like it might be the wake of a boat. And that's one thing. It's kind of difficult to see the boats, but you can usually see their wakes pretty easily. So, in addition to checking for the boats, we want to check for obstacles. In default scenery, you don't really have to worry about obstacles, but with add-on scenery, you just might. If it was made by someone who wants to screw you over, like me, and I made this scenery for Lake Apopka, and I can tell you there is an obstacle located right over there somewhere. You can see a couple of boats hanging around over there. I might be too far away to see it due to draw distance, but right over there near that boat launch is an obstacle. There's a rock and a beacon that marks it, a light, so you can see it at night. So do keep your eyes open, check for obstacles, because you might have to deal with them with add-on scenery. And you want to check for obstacles around the area as well, such as towers and power lines. It's no coincidence I picked Lake Apopka for the demonstration, because it's a very large lake, plenty of room for us to run around, but we still have to worry about boats, wakes, but there's nothing in terms of radio towers anywhere nearby that we have to worry about. Although you can see the seaplane base and the boat launches do have some small towers around them in the form of lights, but nothing too major. So we've cleared the area. Let's walk through the landing process. Landing a seaplane is a bit more tricky than landing a land plane, or given how easy the takeoff was, I don't think the takeoff in a seaplane is too hard a concept to grasp. Landing can be somewhat different though, because we want to land at the slowest possible speed, but not at the highest possible attitude like you typically do with a land plane. In a land plane, you want to land at a full stall, but with a seaplane, power on landings are much more common. With a land plane, you want power off, and with most GA planes, you want to be full stall when your wheels touch the ground. Not so with a seaplane. You want to be moving at as slow as possible speed, but still with enough airspeed to maintain positive control over the aircraft. Since power gives you more control over the effectiveness of rudder and horizontal stabilizer, that means power on landings are much more common. We want to touch down on the step. There's a flock of birds over there. We want to touch down on the step at the slowest possible speed at roughly the same attitude that we had during the on-step taxi. So if you look back at on-step taxi, that attitude we had, that's the attitude we want to have when we land. We just want to do it on the step at the slowest possible speed. We also don't want to sink down into the water that quickly. So the way this is going to work is we're going to land on the step with power on most likely, and we want to make sure the airplane is firmly on the water and not skipping before we pull the throttle back. As we pull the throttle back, the speed is going to decrease, more the floats sink into the water. Once we start to get off of the step, that's when we apply back pressure on the stick to lower the tail, raising the nose. That keeps most of the prop out of the spray of the water, and it also lowers the back part of the floats into the water, increasing the wetted area, which increases the drag. And we want to keep that back pressure and hold the aircraft into the ploughing attitude as it slows down. Now, it can slow down very quickly. There's one thing I want to talk about, and that's something I call the plunge, which is basically a method of applying the brakes on a seaplane on the water. The way it works is you pitch the plane forward, nose down, stick forward in the water. And what that does, I'm going to turn to the right here just a little bit. What that does is that will force the front part of the floats down into the water, increasing the wetted area even more than the back parts of the floats would, increasing the drag. And it has pretty much the same effect of applying the brakes. However, you do not want to do that during landing, at least not until the plane has slowed down to the point where it's firmly in the ploughing phase of an on-water taxi. The reason you don't want to do that is because if you just essentially slam on the brakes like that at a high speed, you're putting a lot of stress on the floats and the struts that connect them to the plane, and your high velocity momentum, it's going to want to carry you forward. You could flip the seaplane trying stuff like that. So don't do it unless you are in the ploughing phase of the taxi. Now, before we demonstrate the water landing, there's one last thing I want to talk about, and that is transitioning from landing to on step. Demonstration today, we're going to bring the seaplane to a complete stop on the water before we do anything. But you can actually transition the seaplane from landing to taxi without coming to a complete stop. I don't recommend doing it for newcomers, however, because doing so does require a bit of practice. I had to do several test flights and practice flights before I started recording this series, so seaplanes aren't necessarily something you can just jump in without practice. So it's going to take some getting used to know what to do. But basically, you're going to, if I walk you through it, as the plane settles into the ploughing phase, you don't want to let it get into the ploughing phase. What you actually want to do is, as the speed slows down, instead of applying that back pressure on landing to get it into the ploughing phase, you want to maintain the level attitude and increase throttle again to keep it up at that on-step speed. Again, that takes a little practice. I might demonstrate it in another video, but that is one thing you can do. But consider that an advanced topic. Alright, so I think now is a good time to demonstrate a landing on the water. I'm going to aim to touch down roughly right there. We do have some traffic over the lake, and I saw a flock of birds earlier. Oh, there they are right in front of us. Should be no factor. And we do know there are boats in the water. I don't see any in my intended landing area now, except for one right there, but he looks like... No, that might be a moving boat, so we're going to have to watch him. Real quick, let's run through the before landing checklist. Water rudder is up. Landing area is checked. Make sure you check the landing area and the airspace around it for traffic and hazards, including birds and towers. Fuel is on. Primer is locked. Carb heat, we'll go ahead and flip that on. And speed, approach speed in the Piper Cub is around 55 miles per hour. We're going to shoot to maintain between 50 and 55 miles per hour. Speedometer, airspeed gauge on the Cub is in miles per hour, not knots. I'm going to go ahead and pull the throttle back to 1500. Okay, that's Cessna 182 down there. And we're going to aim to touch down. There's that hazard there. Let's touch down right over here where that cloud reflection is. Somewhere in this area. That way we are firmly away from the clouds. I'm going to make a left turn to go opposite the direction of that landing area. And throughout this landing, I'll try to walk you through the steps as we do it. So real quick, I'm going to get in position for the landing, and then we'll go ahead and land. Alright, so we're coming on final now. We're going to be passing over the seaplane base and channel. I want to stay somewhat close to the channel to minimize the time it takes to record the taxi in portion. Alright, so fuel is on, carb heat on, water rudder up, make sure of all of that. So again, power on landings are much more common in seaplanes. We're shooting for a speed of between 50 and 55 miles per hour, closer to 50 if we can help it. Now, of course, landing and taking off, you do have to account for the winds, but the winds are pretty calm today. So just real quick again, slowest speed possible, on step attitude, and land on the step, and let the speed gradually transition. Again, you can land and transition straight to an on-step taxi. I'm going to come to a full stop just because that's easier. So the approach phase is pretty similar to a land airplane. Remember, seaplanes do have more drag, and they will sink faster than land planes will due to the float strapped underneath them, but the approach is pretty much the same. Power for altitude, pitch for airspeed, as much as you can, but remember, you do need to use both in a seaplane because controlling where you touch down is very important. A lot of times you're not going to have a lot of room. So as we approach, we want to constantly keep on the lookout for hazards. That includes boats and water objects. Right over there is that rock with the marked beacon that we talked about. I don't see any air traffic. That should be a factor, nor do I see any boats in the way. Now, we would have our flaps down already in any other airplane, but the Piper Cub does not have any flaps. So we're getting close to the water. I now want to start getting on the slower end. Right here at between 50 and 50 miles per hour. Use both throttle and pitch to control that when you get close to the water. Remember, your landing point is critical. So, although it technically is power for altitude, pitch for airspeed, use both to control them. Alright, we're about... how high are we? We're about a 50 feet or so off the water. A little bit higher. So again, slow as possible speed. Take note of that pitch we had during the on-step taxi. That's the pitch we want to have when the floats contact the water. Make sure to maintain positive control throughout the landing. We're getting a bit slow. I have the pitch that I need, so I'm going to use power to sort of maintain that sink rate. And there we go. We're on the water. As you can see, it is kind of hard to tell when you have a flat water texture. We're on the water, so I'm going to bring the power back. The floats are starting to settle into the water. I'm going to increase back pressure, increasing wetted area on the back of the floats, more drag, and the seaplane begins slowing down. At this point, I would not have done that if I wanted to go straight to on the step, but I don't. And the seaplane is starting to come to a stop now. And we are completely stopped. So as you can see, it is kind of hard to tell your height above the water in FSX. I don't know how it is in X-Plane. I've never really flown a seaplane in X-Plane. But for those of us still on FSX and possibly in Flight Sim World 2, it is kind of hard to judge your height above the water, especially when you couldn't see your own shadow. Because as you can see, this flat water texture makes it very difficult. Alright, let's run through the after landing checks. Again, recommend you come to a complete stop because you still have to do after landing checks if you do a transition straight onto the step. So carb heat is off, water rudder is down. I'm going to use the water rudder to get us pointed back towards the seaplane base, and then I'm going to go to an on-step taxi to get us into the seaplane base. Taxiing back in is just like taxiing out, except you're going inland, not out from the land. I need to keep my eyes open for the buoys that mark the channel that leads into the seaplane base. Use the channels when you can, because they indicate areas where it should be pretty clear of any obstacles, and the surface under the water has probably been dredged, so it's a little deeper over there too. Alright, there's a buoy. Red buoy. That's keep left, so we want to stay to the left of that buoy. There should be a green buoy somewhere nearby. There's the green buoy right there off our nose. So using the air rudder, we'll begin turning the seaplane to enter into the channel. Keep left of red buoys, keep right of red buoy or green buoys, since we're coming inland. Alright, since we're close to the entrance to the base, I'm going to plunge to apply the brakes. There's a red buoy, there's a green buoy. Keep left of red, keep right of green. And we want to be in the plowing phase by the time we get to these Yetis over here. I'm going to come to a stop right here. And we're going to talk about docking. I'm going to go ahead and lower the water rudder too, since I'm going to need it. Once we get close to the seaplane base, we don't want to be going on step speeds. We want plunging or plowing, and as we get close to the dock, transition to idle. So we talked about docking in the last video. I'm going to demonstrate it here. I don't recommend approaching the docks with the engines running, even though you can technically do that. The reason I don't recommend it is because seaplanes can be very deceptive. Though they can slow down and come to a complete stop in even less distance than their land plane counterparts, they can also drift across the water an alarming distance that you might not realize. It takes some getting used to, especially at idle taxi. When you're in the idle position going across the water, the seaplane will actually go quite a distance, even though water drag is a thing. For some reason, it seems water drag really only does its job when you're at higher speeds. So it's often best to approach the dock, come to a stop, shut the engine off, and then move the airplane close to the dock using the paddle or slew mode in other seaplanes. So I'm going to put us into the plowing phase so we can approach the dock a little quickly here. And I'm going to aim to put us at the same dock we left from. Always keep your eyes open for hazards. There could be boats. The hazards I see around here is I know there's one off to our left, that seawall on the far end. Alright, so we're getting close to the dock now. I want to slow down. We want idle taxi as we approach the docks. I'm going to run through the shutdown checklist real quick. Engine at idle, magnetos to off. So when I'm ready to shut down, I just move the mags to off. I'm going to turn us to face towards the dock. Alright, I'm going to move the mags to off now. And see, the seaplane is still drifting, and it will drift for a while. We were at a pretty slow speed. Alright, magnetos to off. Fuel off. Throttle completely closed. Water rudder up. Whenever we're getting close to the docks and to land, if we want a beach, move that water rudder up to prevent damage. Now, we simply get back out to the paddle and paddle ourselves in to the dock. You can get as close or as far away from these dock objects as you want. Fun thing about these dock objects in FSX, they are hardened, so the plane and helicopters can actually sit on them. Hardened basically means the aircraft can sit on them, helicopters can land on them, that kind of thing. These are hardened objects, so we don't want to get too close, otherwise we can actually get stuck on the object. And I think that's close enough. We're just going to put the paddle back. And in real life, we would tie down to the dock, but we don't have that option in Flight Sim. And that is docking. Real quick before we end the video, we'll talk beaching. So as discussed in the last video, to do beaching, you take it slow and easy, basically. Do not approach the shore at a high speed, because the ground physics that FSX has when it comes to seaplanes on dry land, they're kind of slippery. Now, the proper way to beach in real life is to actually approach the shore, turn the seaplane around, shut the engine off, and then using the vertical stabilizer as a sail, you sail the seaplane backwards onto shore. We don't have that ability in Flight Sim X. Although wind seems to turn us, it doesn't move us. So we have to take the more direct approach. I highly advise making use of more level beaches like you see here. We got a nice sandy beach in front of us. Although it really doesn't matter what the actual land is. If you want to be realistic, you're looking for sand, not necessarily muddy water, but wet dirt close to the shore. So ideally, you'd do this around low tide. As we approach the shore, I'm going to raise my water rudder so it doesn't get damaged. I'm going to try to keep my speed controlled. As we get close to shore, I'm basically looking for the point when we have enough momentum that I can kill the engine, which is right here. I kill the engine, and I just let the momentum carry us onto the shore. And you'll know when you touch the shore, the plane kind of jerks, you kind of saw it there. And just like that, we have beached the seaplane. So again, proper beaching, you would actually back the seaplane onto shore. Can't really do that in FSX. So now we would want to use slew mode to move us completely onto shore, where we would sit, and in real life, you would tie the seaplane down. Now, you don't have to worry about tides in Flight Sim, so all that stuff about seaplanes drifting out to sea and all that, that was mostly just for fun. Now, once you're on dry land like this, you can see Shift P doesn't work because float planes. So slew mode is going to be your best friend when operating float planes, especially float planes that aren't the A2A Piper Cub. So that was beaching the seaplane. Hope you enjoyed this video, and we will see you in the next one. There are still more videos in this series coming, so there's still more to talk about with these things. Hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you next time.